I love that voice, that recording in progress. Okay, I know that we're going to have people entering the room here. Wonderful. And while everybody gets into the room, we're going to give people some time here. Let's get things started. Um, and we were just thinking to throw in the chat your name and where you're coming in from, where you're located. I'll start. I'm in the cloudy state of Maryland today. I had to look out the window because I haven't been outside yet.
Yeah, I'll go. My name's Andrew, and I'm calling from Austin, Texas. There we go. We got another DCer, Santa Monica, Chicago, all my favorite cities. That's awesome.
All right. We're going
Yes.
to give everybody a couple minutes to come in and get kind of settled. We'll get started probably around, Andrew, I'm going to make you wait till 2:01, and then I'll start with some housekeeping.
Sure, yeah. But thanks for coming, y'all.
We're trying out this new format of, we do this session in person at an event, and then a couple weeks later we do it on repeat. And so it's new for Mighty Citizen and new for our audiences as well, but I think it's going to go really well. So any feedback you have on that? We got to go Gators. That's Bree. For those of you that are just joining, we're just getting to know each other in the chat for a moment. We're going to give people another minute to come in, and then we will go ahead and get started. This feels like the a Friday to me, and I don't know why. And once you get that in your head, it's hard to get it out of your head.
Yes.
Ah, is it Nalia? I love how I love that name, Nalia. Maybe it should be Friday. Oh, great. Well, thanks for being here with us. All right. So we have a bunch of people got a couple Texas, a Chicago. What I don't like about webinars is when, like, I like to talk to people as they're coming in. So, Andrew, you got to talk to me. You're
Well,
the
I
only
was
one I
going to
can
say
hear.
that is, if it helps y'all, for those who are attending, the moment this webinar is over, there will be kickoff of the first game of the World Cup at, I believe, 2 p.m. Central Time. So you can go straight from some fun association talk to some fun football talk. Yeah, Vermont. Nice.
I love that DMV. Hi, Keisha. All right, so it is 2:01, and I'm going to start with our housekeeping. So, just to thank you all for being with us today. We're so happy that you're going to spend some time and learn from Andrew. I got a sneak peek at this at the MMCNT conference, and it was a great session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicola Rougeau, and I'm the Senior Director of Client Engagement at Mighty Citizen. And the topic of today's conversation is creative singularity, what happens when everyone has the same tools. And I'm thrilled to be in the virtual room here with Andrew Buck, who is our Associate Director of Brand Marketing. Andrew, as I mentioned, presented this a couple weeks ago at MMCNT, and now we're sharing it with the whole community. Few housekeeping items. If you have questions during the webinar, please make sure that you put them in the Q&A section of Zoom. We are going to be monitoring chat. You see our other little mighty citizen here. That's Mindy on keys in the background. She is actually going to be putting some tools and resources in there, but she'll also, if you accidentally put it into chat, she'll move it, but we want to make sure we don't miss anything. So please put it in the Q&A. We're hoping that we'll have some time for question and answers at the end, but you can ask them throughout the presentation. If you have or need closed captioning, there is a live transcript option at the bottom of the screen where you can enable it if you need to. And lastly, the presentation slides. Some tools will be sent out to every attendee that registered to the webinar, and we'll share the chats in the chat as well as they are referenced. All right, so let's get this started. I'm going to hand this over to Andrew.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay. So, yes, welcome everyone. Thanks for giving us an hour of your, what I assume are very, very busy days. And just like Nicole mentioned, having the Q&A ready, if you have questions, I'd like to ask you to get their chat ready because I do want to start with a question. And you can just go ahead and we need participation if you feel up to it, because I think it's a really nice question to sort of level set here at the beginning. So, the idea is that in one or two words, what does your association offer that a well-prompted AI cannot? So I'll wait and see some of the answers. What does your association offer that a well-prompted AI tool cannot offer? Human connection, community, networking. Yep. Advocacy. Amen to that. Yeah. Human connection for sure. Anybody else? Anybody else? Discernment. Oh boy, I love the word discernment. It's close to one of my favorite words, which is nuance. In fact, oh, this is just happenstance. I have my nuance hat here on my desk that I made, so you can see what a nerd I am. Um, great, great. And I like the honesty of, I'm not sure. So, um, listen, all of these answers are obviously right, and I kind of expected them. Things like human connection, community, advocacy, trust. Um, Maybe interestingly, I don't think anyone yet entered credentials or certifications, which is fine, but it's maybe another example of that. And those are all obviously things that artificial intelligence can't replicate. But now I want you to maybe take a moment and think about sort of whatever your particular association published this week or in the last couple of weeks. Think about what you published and ask yourself whether any of the stuff that you published includes the words or ideas that you just named in the chat as sort of your unique value proposition. And by the way, I'm not talking about in the mission statement at the bottom of an email, but of course, as the substance of the content itself, or sort of in the way you chose to talk about it, the angle you took, the thing that you said that nobody else could say or would say. Did you use these ideas and these words? Maybe so. Now, I will say, in my experience, you're going to hear me say that a lot over the next 45 minutes. Uh, but in my experience, for most associations, or certainly many, there is a real clear gap that is continuing to emerge right now between sort of what makes your association irreplaceable and what your content that you put into the world suggests makes your association irreplaceable. Now, that gap has always existed, but of course, something changed relatively recently that made ignoring that gap much more expensive. And the name is, drumroll please, of course, it's AI. And that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. But we'll touch on some other subjects too. So it's not going to be all AI all the time. Real quickly, let me introduce myself. My name is Andrew Buck. I live in Austin. I've been at Mighty Citizen for about 11 years. I've had the pleasure of working with dozens of associations in my time here. Um, and every time I do get together with Nicole, usually at an ASAE event, I kind of gush to her about how fascinating I find the world of associations. Now, when it comes to AI, maybe it's a little bit more love hate. And by the way, I started Lonesome Dove a couple weeks ago, and I can't stop reading it. So that's a little fun fact about your friend Andrew. Now, about Mighty Citizen. So what do? We craft websites, brands, and marketing strategies for associations that improve lives and, of course, improve careers. So We work only with mission-oriented organizations, and many of those are associations. So we're glad to have y'all here to join us today and see what we have to say about the world of creative singularity. So, couple disclaimers before we jump into the meat of the discussion. So I'm going to keep saying AI a lot, and I'm doing that because saying the more specific thing, which is like, large language models and related generative and analytical tools. Saying that every time would make this about 3 hours long, and we don't want to do that, of course. Also, anyone telling you that AI is going to replace your job or destroy your creativity or transform your association, they're probably selling you something. So I'm not going to tell you any of that today. What I am going to try to claim or argue is that AI has changed the stakes of a problem that many associations already had, and that problem is way more interesting than the particular tool we may be talking about. And then finally, I do want to point out that everything I say today will be 100% true and accurate for at least the next 10 to 15 years, right? Of course not. Now, about how this is going to work, we'll be checking the chat throughout. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions throughout, but enough of my yakking, let's boogie, let's get into it. All right. So the subtitle of this webinar uses the word singularity, which is a physics term for the point at which distinctions sort of disappear. There's a comedian named Stephen Wright who says that a singularity is what happens when God divides by zero. Another Stephen, whose name is Stephen Hawking, you probably know him, he explained more specifically that a singularity, sort of the center of a black hole, if you will, is where the laws of science sort of break down entirely and our ability to predict what happens next completely vanishes, right? And I'm suggesting that exactly that is what is happening to the creative output of many associations right now. So, the quality of what you're producing. So, and by the way, when we say content, we mean it all, everything. So, the really obvious things, newsletters, white papers, all of your educational and professional development content, all of your advocacy alerts, all of your advocacy papers, event communications, and a lot of the stuff at your conferences and events themselves. All of that, the quality of that stuff used to signal something very important about your association. So the creative gap between what you could produce and what anyone else in the world could produce was doing real work on your association's behalf. It was basically telling your members that, this association, this organization has real weight, real resources, real expertise, right? And meanwhile, it was telling anyone who dared to think about competing with you that, don't bother trying to match us, right? So that was what was happening for maybe the last, I don't know, couple hundred years or maybe thousand, depending on how you define associations. But of course, AI is really collapsing that gap. And it's not happening very gradually. I think we can all feel that. And I think it's collapsing it, I don't want to say completely, but let's say 99% of completely. So, really, anyone with a premium AI subscription or two and an hour to kill can produce something that looks and reads just like you do. So that production quality advantage that associations spent decades building is gone or it's going pretty soon. So, whew, right? What a pick me up to start this webinar. But I promise there is lots of good news ahead. Um, Here's another way of looking at it. Let's say this neat little design here represents sort of the quality of your content, right? Its uniqueness, its beauty, its relevance, its creativity, etc., right? That was what was telling your members one thing, your competitors another thing. But now, right, this is what's happening. We're seeing increasingly, even in the association space, maybe even especially in the association space, The rise of AI has created competitors for you that where there used to be none. All right. Now we've seen this show up in a number of ways for associations here at Mighty Citizen. We've seen it show up in the form of current or former practitioners in whatever industry or sector you serve, kind of breaking apart and forming their own identity online. And of course, now with AI, they can do that in a way that really does compete with your association. We've seen it in the form of for-profit organizations increasingly positioning themselves as competitors to not-for-profit associations. And they not only have all the same tools that you have access to, but in many cases, they have the budget to dedicate content teams to using those tools to crank out a lot more and at least a lot of similar looking and sounding material. Um, and there are other competitors too, maybe more niche associations or just straight up other associations that compete with your membership base altogether. Okay. So we keep that in mind. But I want to point out that AI, so it took some of that creative advantage, that sort of moat we had built around our association away. But it didn't take a lot of things. And this is where the optimism starts to pour in, right? And frankly, in all the sort of AI presentations I've sat through or conversations I've been a part of over the last couple of years, I rarely hear this talked about. So now, obviously, it did not take away your ongoing relationship with your specific professional population. And similarly, it didn't take away all the things that you and your colleagues know about what your members are anxious about, what they're quietly proud of, but wouldn't say maybe in a public forum. It didn't take away your knowledge of the sort of questions that they're asking each other that nobody official has answered yet. It doesn't take away your insight into what your members wish someone in a position of authority would finally say plainly. It didn't take away your knowledge of what people may be too embarrassed to admit they don't know or understand, and so on and so on and so on. So let's just sort of agree, I hope, that AI can approximate the sort of surface features and look and feel of your voice as an association. It can produce things that sound and look like you. But there's just some specific things it cannot reproduce, right? And the things your members actually truly really need to hear right now. And here are just some examples that we spun up, right? It cannot know that the clause on page 14 of the new staffing regulation is the one that your members are actually texting each other about right now, and that you may not be aware of. It AI cannot know that there are three members of your largest regional chapter who are about to leave their jobs for the exact same reason, and that that reason is something your association has never addressed directly. It cannot know that the particular phrase or phrases that your members use when talking about their biggest frustration right now in their jobs. And maybe it's language that your association hasn't quite used yet, right? So I just want to be really clear about establishing the boundaries of AI. And frankly, although there are some tools, and we'll talk about them in a minute, that can get us a little bit closer to this, shall we say, discernment. They don't get nearly close enough as sort of the human connection that we were talking about earlier does. But the problem is, I think, well, one of the problems is that most associations maybe don't know that fully, or they know it intuitively, but they haven't made it explicit enough within their operations in such a way that you can build from it, right? So the knowledge, it exists somewhere. It may be scattered, it may be concentrated, maybe it lives with the membership coordinator who talks to members every day, or a program director who's been running the annual conference for a few years. Maybe it's the person, if you have one of these people at your association who reads every single session evaluation from front to back. I've known a few of those folks, right? Uh, that knowledge does exist, but again, it's not making its way reliably into your content. So maybe we could put it this way that the most important thing AI did was not so much take something away from you, but maybe it's revealed something that you were under leveraging. And I think it's, as we've seen, raising the cost of continuing to under leverage it, making that cost so high that we really have to do something about it right now. And again, another gap here. There's another gap between what you and your organization know about your members and what shows up in your contact content. And that's what this entire webinar is about. And before we get to the particular solutions, I do want to spend a little bit of time maybe trying to understand why most associations don't know their members as well as they think, or why that at least that knowledge isn't making it into the stuff that we put out into the world. So, real quick question for the chat. What criteria do you currently use to segment your members? To the extent that you segment them at all, but we'd love to hear just what are sort of the top level categories that you're segmenting members by? We would love to see some examples. And of course, this is a very safe space. We're all in support of each other's work. We're all on the same team here.
And I think it's okay and safe to say if you're not segmenting your members.
Absolutely. Yep, member type, membership tier for sure. Yeah, career stage, years in practice. Sectors is interesting. I'm sure that has a very particular meaning, Andrea, in your world. I'd love to hear about that later. Job type, yeah, kind of similar maybe. Yeah, membership type, personas. Yeah, personas. Congratulations. Yeah, geography, region, work setting. Oh, maybe that's geography or something different, I'm guessing actually. Behavior, practice type. Yeah. Yeah, these are great answers. Keep them coming. Yeah, yeah, you got those membership types there, kind of mixed with, yeah, career stage. Yeah, exactly. Or years in practice. Um, so yeah, these are kind of like, I bet if I'd asked you before to share those examples, many of you would have guessed what your colleagues, would have put in there. And those are all, I want to be really clear here. In our experience, those sort of demographic segmentations are very, very important. And there's a lot that can be drawn from them and done from them, especially if you're stretched a little thin resource-wise internally. But truly, 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 um, we at Mighty Citizen rarely, if ever, see associations that define their audience or segment their audience based on anything about what people believe, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're anxious about, what kind of relationship they want with their profession right now. A good example of that is I love how everyone started the webinar today saying, we can provide community and AI can't. And that's certainly true. Um, but I wonder sometimes if we think much about the swath of our particular membership who aren't interested at all in community, who just want the discounts, who just want the um, maybe the certification, et cetera. And by the way, this is not a criticism at all, because those sort of more psychographic or behavioral, or let's call them maybe human insights, are much harder to measure. They're much harder. It takes a lot more work, which is why they end up getting skipped, understandably. Demographics are much easier to collect and therefore segment by. But it also means that most associations are organizing their entire content operations around criteria that were chosen more for convenience than sort of relevance to the content or to the communication. So that's where I want to start here. And I want to talk about uh, a few examples of these folks. So I want to start with the member that you never hear from, right? And by the way, the quietly disengaged member who we can all maybe picture. Actually, we probably can't picture them. That's the whole point, right? If we try to pull up a vision of them in our head, they're sort of faceless and nameless. But they're not angry. And in fact, it'd be great if they were angry because if you get an angry member, at least they're visible, right? At least they emerge from the great masses and we can talk about it and figure it out and maybe fix it. This quietly engaged member does not complain. They don't send the strongly worded email. They don't ask to speak to the executive director. They just quietly let the renewal relapse. And therefore, you don't get an exit interview. Where there was data, now you have absence. And absence is very hard to interpret, not only by humans, but especially by AI, right? Um, so typically, what we see happen is when there is absence, we sort of assign reasons that are a little more comfortable and external, like, well, there's budget pressures and there's a career change. And by the way, those comfortable things, comfortable explanations may often be true, right? Um, but they're also the explanation you reach for, whether they're true or not. That's kind of the point here. And here's a harder truth, maybe, to point out. Um, Even if you called these members directly, okay, and asked them why they left, they probably couldn't tell you clearly. Um, One way I've heard this put is that disengagement is pre-verbal, right? It wasn't like a decision they make. It's a slow accumulation of irrelevance, right? The feeling like, oh, this wasn't quite for me. This is addressing someone kind of like me, but not like me. This is close enough. This email's close enough to open, but it's not close enough to really matter to me, right? And nobody files a complaint about that, right? They just quietly stop. Um, and by the way, open rates, those kind of typical metrics we measure, that'll never show you this stuff, I don't think. Then there's another group of members called the teacher's pet members, and this one is a doozy because it's really easy to overlook and it's really easy to work with, right? But it's really hard to diagnose from the inside of an association. So, as you could probably imagine, these are the members you hear from the most: committee volunteers, the regulars at your conference, the email repliers, right? Their loyalty is unconditional, right? These are the folks that stay regardless of what you send them or do almost. So here's the thing, because they're the ones giving you feedback, they're the ones, replying to surveys, telling you what they think, coming to all the events. Your content naturally will bend toward what works for them, which means that most associations are, I'll put it this way, most associations produce content for the members least likely to leave. I'll let you take a picture of that if you want, because I think it's a really good insight for us to remember. Again, this is so hard. That's why I love the work at Mighty Citizens, because we just have the advantage of not being in it like you're in it. And therefore, we're maybe able to notice it a little quicker or with a little bit sharper distinction. Um, Meanwhile, the members whose loyalty to you is way more fragile are almost invisible in all the decisions you make about what we're going to publish and what we're going to create. And it goes even deeper than that, if you can imagine. Um, your theory of your membership is built almost entirely from these folks, these teachers' pet, most visible, vocal minority. And it's not because anyone decided this was a good idea to do it this way, but because the whole system is designed not to hear from anyone else but these folks, right? Everyone else is a gap you've been filling with these sort of assumptions. And AI is making this particular issue more consequential because now you can produce vastly more content aimed at that sort of incomplete picture. So, one more question here. And again, safe space. When did you last have a really deep conversation with a member who isn't a teacher's pet, let's call them a board member, committee volunteer, conference regulator? And we're not because, by the way, if you said never or it's been months, I would I'd be like, yeah, join the club, right? That's how it is for most of us. And
It
by the way, I ask this question in every association context in some form, because the answers are really illuminating. And it's not because people don't talk to their members, because when they look at who they've been talking to, a pattern sort of emerges. If they sit with this question honestly, often they'll be like, it is heavily weighted toward the people that sought us out or volunteer our time or have some particular agenda. And this is not a failure on anyone's part. And thank you for getting me these several months. Yeah, last year. Yeah, totally legit. It's not a failure. Those are the people who make themselves available, and they can be immensely, valuable sources of insight. But again, it just sort of means that that mental model of your membership is shaped by them when they're not the ones that we need to worry about.
I would
Okay.
add before you go on, like our Mighty GPS shows this trend in the benchmarking report every single year about research and understanding members and all of that. And it is something that we see across the board with associations that is underfunded, underutilized. So in the feeling of you're not alone, that's true. You're in good company.
Yes, maybe that should be the theme song of this webinar. You are not alone. Um, So, real quick note before we go deep into the sort of solutions stuff, I want to note that there are kind of two association types that we should notice because um, depending on what kind of association you're in, it will have effects on how your content gets shaped and how sort of sameness might creep in to your content. So, there's a concentrated voice association. So that's where, it's typically smaller staff, maybe one or two people responsible for what goes out and distinctiveness then lives in those folks primarily. It's that sort of accumulated judgment, often, you know, over years. These people, you may know some folks at your association, or I shouldn't say some, but maybe one folk who's like, I know these members deeply, like they're my own kin, right? And that judgment they have developed is never made explicit. It just lives sort of in the decisions that they make over and over again over the years. Of course, the risk is the moment they leave for whatever reason, so does all of that discernment, right? And that nuance and that judgment. And therefore, we sort of end up starting from these safe defaults. Another type of association is the distributed voice. So this is almost the opposite. It's like bigger associations, larger staffs, typically more bureaucracy, where content is generated by lots of folks, both inside and outside potentially of the organization. There's too many voices, and therefore there's no coherent editorial center. The content in these associations tends to offend absolutely nobody, and it can often move nobody. Maybe that's a little harsh to say nobody, but certainly not move as many people as we need it to. And as you can imagine, the risk with these associations is that your voice becomes fragmented. And when it's fragmented, it's just worse. Okay. So both of those association types, the concentrated voice, the distributed voice, face the same underlying problem, even if it sort of looks different from the inside, right? And by the way, AI did not create this problem. It's just, again, raising the stakes of ignoring it, making it more costly to ignore. Um, so my view, and I say my instead of our because I haven't, necessarily confirmed this with all of my fellow minded citizens here, but is that the associations that are most alarmed by AI right now, that are kind of freaking out a bit, I think they tend to be the ones that were relying most heavily on content production quality to signal or maybe even think that they're delivering value, to signal value, and maybe in some cases to deliver it. So again, polish, the volume, the consistency of output. Um, there seems to be some connection, some relationship between being alarmed and being like, well, the main way we provide value is just putting out a bunch of stuff. And it's understandable why they would be alarmed, right? Because um, they consider that their main value proposition. And we'll talk a bit in just a second about why maybe they're not totally wrong. But the associations that are least alarmed are the ones that already know something specific and true about their members. And therefore, what AI is threatening are the competitors to you whose only real advantage was content production, volume and quality, right? That advantage, that content volume and production quality advantage, again, is available to everyone now. And I do real quick aside here. I want to acknowledge that saying we all have access to the same tools is a bit misleading because I can confirm that where any particular association is in their AI journey is always distinct. Meaning, I haven't yet quite seen two associations that are in the exact same place and are using AI in the exact same way or aren't using it for the same reasons. So let's just acknowledge that. It's not like we're all power users of AI yet. Um, but I, I think sort of genuine proximity to a specific professional community that is built over years of real human relationships just can never be produced by AI or your competitors. And by the way, that's even true if you were to write about it all and publish it on the internet. So here's what I think that means for you specifically. And I want to be very, very direct about this because I think it's maybe an underappreciation implication of everything we've been talking about. You finally have, in this day and age, permission and by the way, a strategic reason to do the member knowledge work that's always been the most important part of your job, but it was often the first thing to get cut when the calendar filled up or the budget got tight, right? That work of actually knowing your members. And by the way, not just their demographics or transaction history. You can pull a report from your CRM or your AMS to get that right. Um, but what they're again, those sort of ways of describing it, like the things they're really truly worried about, what they're ambitious about, what they wish someone would finally say, what they wish someone would finally explain without them having to ask. All of that, frankly, I think fun stuff is your competitive advantage now. And it's not a nice to have, right? AI is making it sort of an existential necessity. Maybe not to put too strong a point on it, right? But secondly, once you have that raw material, right, AI can become a genuinely powerful creative collaborator, huh? Keyword there, collaborator, instead of just sort of a homogenizing force within your association. So the associations we see that are producing generic content with AI are doing it because they're feeding it generic inputs. It's really that simple. And so AI is not killing creativity in association marketing, but it may be killing the ability to substitute production quality for genuine knowledge of your particular members. And those two things were never the same, but you could, for a long time, I think you could get away with treating them like they were the same thing. So that those most human parts of your job, curiosity, judgment, creativity, ambition, creative ambition, and a sincere interest in the people you serve, all of those things are the most strategically important parts, right? Doing the job, the parts of your job you love doing the most, right? It's not just personally satisfying, it's the whole game now, I think. Um, so let's talk about how to actually do that, shall we? So, first, let's talk about we'll call this the content pipeline, right? And by the way, I know I don't think anybody actually calls it a pipeline, but they call it things like our editorial calendar or our content meeting or our approval process or our workflow or our governance, our production schedule. But the logic is the same behind that in just about every association I've had the pleasure of working with, which is sort of content goes in one end of the pipeline and content then comes out the other. And along the way, the question that drives it throughout is how do we get this thing made and how do we get it out the door on time, right? So that's what a pipeline is. It's optimized for throughput, okay? And let's just acknowledge five quick ways. And you may be nodding at this. I won't get super deep into this for time reasons, but there are many ways that content operations, we see them break down. Authority vacuum, meaning like everyone owns content a little bit, but nobody owns it enough to make the calls that really matter, right? The buy-in gap, you can probably guess what this is, right? The people who would benefit most from better content, people like in membership, in advocacy, in education, aren't always the same people being asked to contribute or change how content is actually made. And therefore, communication staff bear the cost of that transition. And so you sometimes see varying levels of sort of buy-in, especially if you're looking to make any sort of structural changes to how our association approaches the content question. Number three is the executive distance problem. This one's real simple. They've got the executives of the association way up here on the org chart, and down at the bottom of the org chart are the people who are actually connecting most with the members. There's some irony there, maybe. The people with the least member proximity are often the ones influencing content strategy, operations, and production the most. Number four, this is alignment failure. And this doesn't come up a ton, but it doesn't come up none. And that is when um, content within an association gets produced because it's on the calendar, not because it is serving particular narratives or particular strategic goals that the association has. And then finally is the bottleneck. At Mighty Citizen, this is something we've really focused on for a few years now, really, which is how do we help associations create structures that are both sort of light and flexible, but which are designed to remove bottlenecks, because bottlenecks are the major contributor to poor content, to slowly produce content, and to irrelevant content. So what do, right? We create a creative system. This is the opposite of a content pipeline, a creative system. And by the way, it doesn't replace a pipeline, it sits upstream of it, okay? So the creative system sh should answer a very different question than the pipeline does, right? The question a creative system asks is, what do we actually know about our members, and how do we make sure that that knowledge shows up in everything that we publish, right? And this shows up in specific moments, uh, especially in the content workflows, where often in a pipeline structure, we're thinking, again, how do we get this made and out the door on time? But instead of just asking those questions, maybe we're asking questions about, um, does this align with our particular knowledge about this particular segment, this particular audience that we're trying to serve with this particular piece of content? It also shows up in the speed with which you put out content, um, whereby because you've built structures to gather and harness that knowledge within your association, you can push out content in a more timely manner, which becomes an increasing competitive advantage because typically associations are almost designed to produce things slowly because there has to be approval and legal and compliance and committees and then back to committees and reapprovals and rewrites. And therefore, it can take you 2, 3, 4 weeks to put out something that your competitors, including, by the way, just individual practitioners with a really nice TikTok following, can put out in about 30 minutes. Okay. So here are the four things you need to create a creative system within your association. One, you need a theory of your members, right? What does that mean? It basically means personas built on psychographic insights, right? Um, that is one of my favorite parts of the about the work we do here, especially in user research, is not just doing the research, but figuring out how to synthesize that in a meaningful, evidence-based way to create real personas. And I think we have slightly different approaches to personas here than maybe some other agencies, precisely because we're sort of obsessed with like, how do we make your personas practical, practically useful, where you can literally look at it and then know exactly how to create some great content for that group. Number two, a documented editorial point of view. Okay. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Third, a way to stress test output before it goes out. Right. And by the way, this is not about more committee approvals, right? This is about making sure that we stress test content against the question of will this land with the people least likely to tell you if it didn't. Again, would this content land with the people least likely to tell us if it didn't? And then finally, a feedback loop that captures weak signals. We kind of talked about that a minute. I'll have a solution for that in just a second. So, last section here. I'm going to move through this at a good clip. And of course, we're going to send you this deck later via email, and it'll include notes for most of these slides, which have more detail. So here are 10 things we can do on Monday to start attacking this work with sort of a new mindset. So number one is start a member intelligence archive. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to create a shared doc and you're going to start collecting everything your members produce when they're not talking directly to you. Forum posts, LinkedIn comments, session evaluations, replies to emails, Reddit threads, questions asked at the end of your webinar, things overheard at the reception after the panel starts, those kind of things, right? Then, about once a month or so, you're going to take all that material, you're going to feed it into an AI tool, and then ask it very specific questions like, which topics keep coming up that you're not addressing? What language do your members use naturally that isn't showing up in your own content? Google's Notebook LM is a fantastic tool for pulling this off. And by the way, this is not a replacement for conversation. It is a first pass that tells you sort of where to point your conversations next. One important caveat. AI is really good about finding patterns in what exists. It is blind to what is absent. I almost said abstinent, right? What's absent? Like, members who never reply or any sort of generative data. Okay, that's number one. Number two, segment psychographically, not just demographically. We sort of touched on this, so I won't belabor it, but these are some of the questions that you could ask to begin to develop psychographic segments. What do they believe about their profession? What are they trying to prove? What are they trying to escape? What are they trying to achieve? Are they pragmatists or idealists? I think there's a really untapped world in which associations use common personality psychology, whether that's the ocean model of personality or even something fun, like, I don't know, like Enneagrams, to go about entering the world of psychographic segmentation. Number three, find a segment that your database doesn't know exists. And so this is having fun. This is experimenting, right? We don't have to be super serious about this to start. Let's just pick one criterion that has nothing to do with membership status or career stage or whether they attended an event. Um, Pick a criterion that could only be viewed probably through observation. So it could be a shared anxiety, a shared way of talking, like vocabulary. Um, and then you can use sort of your member intelligence archive as a starting point. Um, there is a tool I want to mention called Perplexity. Basically, Perplexity, um, how do I put it? It's like you ask it specific questions and you get synthesized answers quickly. So you could ask, like, what are nurses most concerned about regarding new staffing regulations? And it does all that sort of super fast Googling, right, for you. And then it synthesizes a picture of that conversation across multiple sources with citations so that you can follow up. So Perplexity is a tool you might want to check out. Next up, have the conversation your surveys never have. And I know these some of these tips may sound like a little like, well, wouldn't that be nice, Mr. Buck, if I could just do all that? And I understand that, but um, I hope that we're beginning to feel like slowly beginning to feel like more and more masters of AI in such a way that those things that used to eat up so much of our calendar time get shrunk way down with the help of some AI so that we open up our calendars to actually do this sort of, frankly, ethnographic style research. This is one way to do it. There are many others. Find three members outside your obvious categories and then have a conversation where you barely talk. No agenda. You're not selling them anything. You don't ask them what they think of your association. You want to understand their lives, especially their professional lives. Number five, sit in on something you skip. Oh boy, do we love meetings? Shout out for meetings. Yes, anyone? Well, there's probably many, many meetings that you never attend because it feels outside your job description. I would encourage you to, I don't know, once a month or so, maybe more, just sit in on those things, even if they seem so irrelevant. Because even in those irrelevant things, especially again if there are members involved, but not just it can be an internal meeting too. you will begin to again accumulate that discernment, that nuance, those insights. And again, try to be unseen is a bit of a cheeky thing. But what I'm really trying to get at there is I think so much user research, whether done by you or by an outside vendor, is can be very biased by how it's conducted. And so we want you to sort of be as quiet as possible. Number six. Oh, I doubled that. All right. Number seven. I want you to develop your editorial point of view. All right. And these are the three sentences I want you to fill out to create your official editorial point of view. Okay. One, what you believe that isn't universally agreed on. Two, what you'll say directly that others will hedge. And three, what you won't do. Here is, oops, I'm moving through this quickly. Let's see. Here's an example. Let's say a nursing association did this to create their editorial point of view. Theirs would be the biggest threat to nursing as a profession isn't staffing ratios or burnout. It's that people are making policy decisions about nurses who have never spent a night shift on the floor. So that's what they believe that is universally true. Then they say hospital administration and nursing practice are in active conflict right now. And we, this association, we are going to say so plainly rather than calling it a challenge or an opportunity for alignment. And then finally, what we won't do. Well, our nursing association will not publish content that asks nurses to be more resilient as a substitute for systematic change. You need an editorial point of view if you're going to stand out. Okay, three more and then we're done. Hey, draw your approval process on a whiteboard. I know it may seem like really, I promise you. First of all, you may think you've done this, but you may not have actually ever done this, right? It just feels like something that would have happened in the past. But even if you've done it, do it again, right? And you're going to write down every little thing. Take, I don't know, maybe a dozen pieces of content, and for each one, really map out every person, every sign off, every, handoff, every tool used from beginning to end. And then for each one of those on your big whiteboard, I want you to say, we do it this way because either something went wrong once, and you would maybe not be shocked by how often we see content operations that are based on something horrific that showed up on the website accidentally years ago, right? Or number two, it's just we've always done it this way. Okay. And then again, we're experimenting here. Next time we put out a white paper, next time we put out that success story, that blog, that research report, we're going to remove one of these people, one of these steps, one of these approvals, and we're just going to see what happens. And I promise you, it probably will be okay. And if it's not, then you'll know. Number nine, measure what actually matters and let AI help you do it. The notes on this slide are quite long, and since we're running short on time, I'm not going to go through it, but you will see them in the deck. But the gist of this one is that open rates and click-through rates, et cetera, tell you almost nothing about the members, again, you need to reach, not our teachers' pets, right? And we want to connect engagement to renewal behavior. Of course, we all want to do that, right? That's kind of the holy grail. But many associations, either that we've seen, either kind of don't measure things at all, or they don't measure enough, or they're not measuring close enough to real time, or probably the most pernicious is that they don't measure the right things. There are some good tools you could check out, like Meltwater and Brandwatch. These things are nice to help you, you know, dip your toes into the user research world. Basically, these tools help you understand what people are talking about online. Sort of similar to Perplexity, but different. And then finally, I want you to start. This is right. Just do this on Monday, right? Shift your entire culture on Monday. Good luck. No, but we want to start shifting your internal culture toward a media company framework. So, content should have a seat at the strategy table, not just be there to execute. It pains me when I see communications teams, marketing teams, even membership teams sort of treated as sort of the executors of a strategy that was developed maybe without their input or certainly without their total control. Again, this is another way to change the culture. Bring the person near the bottom of the org chart. They don't have to be there, but it's whoever is truly in most direct contact, who's getting the emails from the members, who is talking to them the most, who's leading those member events. Maybe this is even some chapter leaders if you have chapters. Bring them in and give them decision-making authority. Also, make sure that someone owns the voice of your association and has the standing to protect it. Again, because of what AI is doing to our ability to produce really, really high quality content almost instantly and almost for free, it becomes especially important for groups like professional associations to invest authority in someone who knows your voice inside and out and whose primary job is to protect it. Another job title for this one, sometimes in other parts of the world, is a brand manager. And then finally, identify who has the most genuine member proximity and give them a formal role. That's kind of a repeat of the other one. So listen, um, these are just the beginning. This is not a system. Your system is going to get your creative system will get built over time, of course, through the decisions and choices you make. Um, my hope is that you feel like you have a bit more permission and you have a slightly adjusted view of what AI can do for you and what creative opportunities it opens up, meaning it'll allow you to be more of a champion for the actual people you serve and a real, let's say, understander. Is that a word of them? Listen, the tools are going to keep getting better. The part of your job that was always a grind is going to take up less time. And what you do with that new time is really the whole game. Please get closer to those people that you serve, learn what they're worried about, say the true thing clearly, and build something that only could have come from you. Thank you very much. I was rushing there at the end because I have a tendency to talk a lot, but we did come in under time and we have a few minutes left. If anyone wanted to ask questions.
I don't have any questions in the queue. So if you have questions, please submit them. I am going to say, Mr. Buck, that I always learn from you every time that I see something.
You.
I'm also going to mention, I think that a couple of insights that you brought to the table that really ignited in me is really create using AI to create the space to allow you the time to really know the audiences better. I do think prioritization has to be made. And really, is it an audience that is going to be fruitful for your organization to dig deeper into? But I think you're going to find insights from all of them. I also think I want to mention, please keep an eye out on your email boxes because, Andrew, you mentioned when you get to your desk on Monday to open a blank document. Well, our team is working on a tool as we speak that is going to help you build out your personas using AI and really enhance that process for you and make that easier. So keep an eye out on your email boxes. Might be a couple weeks, might be a month, but just keep your eye out. Our team's working on it because they see a need for it. So, are there any questions? And yes, it is a free tool for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all again. Enjoy the World Cup. Enjoy your work. We're huge fans of associations and we're happy to help with anything. And frankly, just email me, abuck at Mighty Citizen, ABUCK at Mighty Citizen with any random questions you have. And I'm happy to geek out about this stuff with you.
We
Otherwise,
love those ideas.
yeah. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Make sure that you answer your post survey and give us some insight. We are always looking to improve and provide new tools, and we take that feedback really, really seriously. And Mindy and team will be following up with emails, and we already shut off the thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, we'll follow up with emails.